Godspeed. Godspeed, gentlemen.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
2, 1, 0, 0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, Roger. Go for deploy.
Thanks, everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good afternoon and welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Megan Cruz and you are watching the pre-launch news conference for NASA and Boeing's OFT-2 launch. OFT-2 is an uncrewed flight test of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft to certify it for regular flights for NASA's Commercial Crew program. It is scheduled to launch in 2 days, Thursday at 6:54 p.m. Eastern Time on a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Joining me today are some familiar faces. To my left, we have Steve Stich, manager of NASA's Commercial Crew program. Next to him, Dana Weigel, deputy manager of NASA's International Space Station program. Mark Nappi, vice president and program manager of Boeing's Commercial Crew program. And Gary Wentz, vice president of government and commercial programs at ULA. And finally, Will Ulrich, launch weather officer with Space Launch Delta 45. Each will deliver some opening remarks, and then we'll take your questions. We're going to start first with Steve. Go ahead.
Thank you, Megan. It's great to be here today. It's an exciting time for NASA and Commercial Crew as we bring on our second space transportation system to the International Space Station. We did have our launch readiness review this morning for OFT-2, and that went really well. It was short. It was very clean. There's really no issues that ULA, Boeing, or NASA are working for the launch coming up. So we're go to proceed toward the launch on Thursday, 6:54 p.m. Eastern Time, with the docking about 24 hours later on May 20th. And then we have a backup opportunity, of course, 1 day later on May 20th at 6:32 p.m. Eastern. I got an opportunity to go out and look at the spacecraft and launch vehicle this morning with the Boeing and ULA team. The launch vehicle and spacecraft look great. It's great to see it in the vertical integration facility, and Gary and the team will be rolling that vehicle to the pad tomorrow. If I just think back at the 10 months since we were here last summer, a lot of hard work have gone into remediating the valve fixes, getting the vehicle ready to go. I can't thank the NASA, Boeing, ULA team enough for all that hard work across many centers. You know, we're at that point now where it's time to go fly Starliner and go test the systems, in particular for this flight, the uncrewed test flight. It'll be a test of the rendezvous and docking system, the navigation sensors, and the NASA docking system as we dock to the space station. Those tests, you can do so much on the ground, you can do so much analysis, and then at some point it's really ready to go fly and test those systems. Of course, we've got a new reusable crew module for this flight, and then a new service module. It's the first flight of the lightweight service module, and that really sets us up well for the crewed flights. It's the very same configuration we'll be flying for CFT and subsequent flights. So, you know, our objective is to really bring this system online. We really would like to have, and our program is designed to have 2 full space transportation systems, and we're excited to bring Boeing online. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dana Weigel, who's the Deputy ISS Program Manager.
All right, thank you, Steve. Let's see, with the completion of the LRR this morning, we're one step closer to welcoming Starliner on board Space Station. It's really a landmark flight, and as Steve talked about, it's a really critical step for us in moving towards having 2 routinely flying crewed vehicles who can bring our crew to and from ISS. So we're really excited and looking forward to the mission. It's been really busy on board station in terms of visiting vehicle traffic. We just had our first private astronaut mission, the Axiom 1 mission. Crew 4 launched basically on the heels of the Axiom crew returning. And then Crew 4 and Crew 3 did a short direct handover with each other. And then Crew 3 came home on May 6th. And as Steve said, looking forward to the launch this Thursday, 24 hours later, docking with Space Station. late Friday evening. During the docking itself, or during the approach and rendezvous itself, the crew on board will be monitoring the Starliner vehicle. They'll send a test command to turn on a docking light just to check the command link. And then when the vehicle is at about 250 meters, they'll send a hold command. The vehicle will hold, and that'll let us know that command's working as we expect it to. If needed, the crew could also send a retreat or an abort command. The mission will be about 4 to 5 days long. It's bringing with it some just basic crew supplies and a little bit of EVA hardware, and then on the way home, we'll send back some station hardware and 3 expended Norse tanks. Right around the corner after the OFT-2 mission, we've got a Progress undock, 79P. Will be undocking on June 1st, and then the 81P Progress will launch 2 days later on June 3rd. And then we've got our SpaceX 25 cargo mission launching on June 7th. And somewhere in there, we're going to have NG-17 depart, unberth and depart. The teams are still working through all the activities and trying to decide where exactly we'll put that departure. So a lot going on, but Space Station and the crew on board are ready and excited and looking forward to the Starliner mission. With that, I'll hand it to you, Megan.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, a lot going on. Mark?
All right, good afternoon. My name's Mark Nappi. I, too, got to participate in the walk down this morning. Thank you to Gary for the walk down of the vehicle. Saw a lot of smiling faces, and people are ready for the first phase of the mission, which is the pre-launch and launch. A little bit of vehicle status. We have completed all of our checks. The hatch is closed. We did one last cycle of all the valves yesterday, and they all operated nominally, so we're in good shape. We will disconnect the purge today that we provided to the oxidizer valve system. So those will be ready to roll out to the pad and do their final checks on launch day. There's really no outstanding issues, and we're ready for roll on Wednesday morning. There's a couple of images of the Starliner that we provided. The first one is of the vehicle right prior to being stacked, or as it was being stacked onto the launch vehicle. And the next one is a shot of the interior of the vehicle with Rosie, the model for our mission. She's instrumented, and we'll be getting some good data from Rosie. There's a couple of phases of the mission that we are focused on. First, obviously, is the pre-launch and launch phase, and that's, of course, Thursday morning. But then the team's got to stay focused because we have several of demonstrations that we'll be running as we locate the International Space Station, make our approach to the International Space Station, and then finally get docked. That's the second phase. The third phase of the mission is some docking demonstrations that we'll do, or as we're docked, some demonstrations that we'll do, and then finally the fourth phase is undocking and reentry and landing. So the team will stay focused throughout the entire mission. Speaking of the team is ready. It's strong right now, and they have a lot of respect for the system, so they're going to watch things very closely over the next week as we perform the mission. We have a reliable Atlas V, and we have a great mission operations team at JSC ready to execute the mission. So we're ready to proceed. Back to you, Megan.
All right, Gary.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Wentz, the Vice President of Government Commercial Programs at United Launch Alliance. We're really excited to be here today. It's been a journey to get here. We were here last summer. We swapped out a booster. But this flow has gone extremely clean, and we're excited to be able to launch our 150th Atlas V here from the Cape with Starliner capsule to the ISS. Really appreciate the partnership with our NASA and Boeing partners and the confidence that they've instilled in our team to be able to deliver this critical payload and this capability for the International Space Station. As Steve and Mark said, we did walk down the vehicle today. We're not working any issues at all. The team's actually ahead of schedule on the preparations for roll tomorrow. You know, this is a test flight. just like the capsules going through testing, the launch vehicle's got a lot of unique capabilities that we designed specifically to carry Starliner. It has an emergency detection system on board. It has an aeroskirt on board. It is also the second flight of this version of a dual-engine Centaur that we're flying. Those capabilities we're going to be paying particular attention to, make sure they perform nominally, and that will continue to grow our library of data that's available for the Atlas vehicle. This vehicle is configured just as if we were going to put crew on it, and we're very excited to be able to launch crew on our next flight. Thank you all.
So ULA, Boeing, and NASA are all ready. Will, tell us how the weather is looking.
Thanks, Megan. You know, before I get into the forecast, I want to briefly talk about Central Florida climatology for the month of May, because May can be kind of tough to forecast here, because May's that month where we traditionally shake off the dry season, where we typically don't have a lot of precipitation during the winter and spring months. But then we get into that wet season during the summer, where we see afternoon showers and thunderstorms. So right now, we're still kind of shaking off that dry air. So we do anticipate a couple of isolated showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of afternoons. But overall, the coverage is expected to be quite low. And that's part of the reason why, you know, we're pretty optimistic going into Thursday evening's launch opportunity. So if we take a look at the forecast, right now we've got a 70% chance of favorable conditions. But like I said, you know, still cannot rule out a couple of showers and or thunderstorms west of Interstate 95, west of the Indian River Lagoon, and that would bring that potential for a violation of either the cumulus cloud rule or the anvil cloud rules. Now, the anvil cloud rules, it has rules. It's actually made up of two separate rules, the detached anvil cloud rule and the attached anvil cloud rule. Now, looking at Friday, things change. We get into more of that summertime pattern. So we're going to see a big increase in moisture from South Florida and the Caribbean, and that added moisture will only fuel additional showers and thunderstorms, particularly again across the interior, but we can't even rule out some showers here locally over Cape Canaveral. So with that in mind, we are more pessimistic going into Friday with a 70% chance or 60% chance of unfavorable condition, 40% go. With three primary concerns: the cumulus cloud rule, the anvil cloud rules, again made up of both the attached and detached anvil cloud rules, as well as flight through precipitation, which is a unique user constraint, Boeing Starliner constraint, where we don't want to fly that capsule through precipitation. So that will be something that we're looking out for on Friday. But regardless what Mother Nature decides to throw at us, the Space Launch Delta 45 and the 45th Weather Squadron are excited to support this very important mission. Thanks.
Thank you for those forecasts. We will definitely hope for Thursday then. All right, so let's open it up for questions now. We'll alternate between reporters that we have here in the room, but also we have some reporters on the phones. Remember, when you ask your question, just let us know who you'd like to answer that question from the dais here. All right, let's take the first one here. Yeah, you.
Just waiting for a microphone. Jim Siegel, I'm with NASA Tech. I asked Steve a question last week in the teleconference about, and you responded, there's planning to be one Crew Dragon and one Starliner trip per year. So as a kind of a follow-up to that, will Russian cosmonauts be invited to travel on these two American vehicles? And how will that work? Is there going to be still Americans traveling on Soyuz capsules or not? Have invitations been given to the Russians to participate in Starliner and Crewliner? Could you go over that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think I'll let Dana answer that question from the space station program. But
yeah, so it's our goal to have what we call integrated crew, meaning we have Russian crew flying on our U.S. crewed vehicles, and we'd like to fly our crew members on the Soyuz vehicle, and so those plans have been in work for a while. As you can imagine, with newly flying spacecraft, the Russians would like to make sure we're finished testing, certifying, and demonstrating that capability. So in terms of a Dragon vehicle, I think we've satisfied what they want to see for safety, and so we're working through the process with them for Dragon specifically. for the swap. That agreement is actually out of their space program and kind of with their government at this point. They go through a process similar to what we would go through, so they've got to take that through a couple of review cycles. It'll take a little longer to get there with the Boeing Starliner vehicle. They're going to want to see the results from our test flights, and they're going to want to see us finish CFT, and then we'll have similar conversations when we get to that point.
Do you think it might be a year or 2 years before that occurs?
I would guess that at least we have to talk after CFT flies, so we'll probably look at the results of that. Our goal would be with the beginning of our crewed flights, our PCM missions, to be able to start swapping. So that's our target. We'll see if we get there in time. It depends how much data they want to see, how the missions go. But I think we're there, like I said, technically with Dragon, we're already there. So they're ready to start doing that, assuming that their government supports it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
From our perspective, we're excited to fly the Russians, when they're ready to go fly on our vehicles. We've flown Japanese Space Agency astronauts. We've flown the European Space Agency on Dragon. So we're very excited and looking forward to flying the Russian cosmonauts when we get the agreement in place on Dragon and then later on Starliner. So,
let's take the next question from over the phone. We have Jeff Faust from Space News.
Hey, good afternoon. Jeff Faust of Space News. For Mark Nappi, at the ASAT meeting last week, the panel noted some concerns that certification of the Starliner parachutes was lagging. I wonder if you could give us an update on the status of that parachute certification and what's left to do after OFT-2. Thanks.
Okay. So I think they were speaking to the certification as it relates to PCM-1. And we do have some testing planned this summer with NASA to run an additional test on the parachutes. The results of that will obviously lead to certification. So as far as the planning towards PCM-1, we believe we have a plan that supports the mission.
Okay, we'll take one from the room here, over there.
Thanks, Megan. Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. I have two questions. The first for Mark. I understand that there's not going to be live video from Starliner until docking. Is that accurate? And can you explain why that is and if that is going to be different for the crew flight? And for Gary, Atlas is getting human rated rather late in its life. Is there anything that is going to be easily transferable from the experience of human rating Atlas into Vulcan? And maybe you can kind of give us an update on Vulcan and how you're preparing also Vulcan to carry crew. Thanks.
Okay, to answer your first question, yes, there is a system that's installed on the Starliner called Mustang that will provide video. It's being implemented in an incremental way, so this first mission will not have live feed on the way up, but you'll get it after docking. Eventually, that system will be completed out, and we'll be able to provide that function.
Thanks, Irene. And the question relative to Vulcan and Vulcan certification, we have, for what's on contract, the remaining flights on Atlas. As we designed Vulcan Centaur to go forward, we did not preclude the opportunity to be able to human rate it. So if the requirement comes forward from a customer that we want to human rate, we will use a lot of the technologies that we have demonstrated on Atlas to include things like the emergency detection system. It is relatively simple to transition that system over onto Vulcan. It's similar technology, and it will be flight proven at that point. So Vulcan's making great progress.
Thank you for those questions and those answers. We have Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now on the phone.
Thanks for taking my question. I think my questions are probably for Gary, too, if I could. Is the blue team, ULA Boeing team, going to be out at the pad in the White Room tomorrow during the countdown to run through, their closeout procedures, and will they be reopening the hatch and closing the hatch, or is the hatch currently closed for flight? And to follow up on Irene's question, I know you obviously have the 6 Atlas Vs allocated for all of the Boeing PCM missions, but you're planning on retiring that vehicle for other customers in the next few years. So there's a chance the Atlas V will be flying only Starliner missions through much of this decade. curious if you could talk about your plans for sparing and maintaining that Atlas V flight capability through much of the decade, while all of the rest of your missions are going to be on Vulcan Centaur. Thanks.
So I think I'll hand the blue team question over to Mark.
Okay, our teams will support the mission tomorrow. Obviously, there's no crew to be loaded, so it'll be an abbreviated support process.
And from the Atlas flyout perspective, we do have the 6 PCMs scheduled with Starliner. From a resource perspective, where we have measures in place to protect the talent and ensure that we retain the critical skills to be able to fly an Atlas as late as we need to. That capability will exist, and that team will bridge the gap over to Vulcan as we move forward. And we're in conversations with Boeing and other customers for that capability.
We have a question here in the room.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. I want to follow up about the Vulcan Centaur. What I think I just heard you say, I'm a little surprised at. Are you not planning to human rate it full speed for Starliner? And I would like to get from Steve Stich your perspective. Is that not a high priority to human rate the Vulcan Centaur for Starliner? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I can start off. Right now we have on contract the 6 post-certification missions for Boeing, and as Gary said, they have Atlases for all those flights. We would look toward the end of the decade to have to award other flights or have other flights potentially for Boeing, and so we would look for a new system. When Boeing and ULA and NASA get together and we talk about that system, we're happy to have those discussions. And NASA would look forward to human rating a new system when Boeing and ULA are ready. So.
And that's the same plan that we're tracking. We're working with Boeing and NASA, and as the requirement evolves, we'll go through the certification process. The nice feature of the Vulcan Centaur is over 90% of that hardware, either in specific part numbers or in design, is actually flying from Atlas onto Vulcan. And so our focus would have to be, in this case, looking at the emergency detection systems that would be needed to fly a Starliner capsule and to human certify the engine.
Next, we have Marcia Dunn from Associated Press on the phone. Marcia, you there?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. 2 questions. First one for Dana. I'm looking for a sort of a status update on the wet helmet situation from a spacewalk a couple months ago. And is any of the spacewalk hardware going up and down on Starliner related to that to try to troubleshoot what happened or provide some extra helmets or whatever? And then for Mark, you mentioned Rosie's coming back for another flight, and you said the mannequin will be instrumented. What kind of sensors are going to be on board? And as I recall from last summer's attempt, the mannequin wasn't really going to be instrumented. It was essentially ballast. And has that changed? And if so, what exactly are you going to be looking for from the instrumentation? Thanks.
Okay, I'll start with the update on the EVA investigation. So just as a refresher, on back in March we had an EVA, and one of our crew members, EV2, came in with about 8 to 10 inches of a very thin layer of water on the inner surface of the helmet bubble. So we formed an investigation team to take a look at that. It is by design that the suit can spit out a couple droplets of water, but this was a bit beyond what our normal experience base is, and so it was specifically the quantity of the water that got our attention with this one. We are bringing a lot of water samples home, filters, et cetera, as part of the investigation. So far, we haven't found anything unusual. We have looked at water from a handful of different sources on board the spacecraft, and it all looks as it should to us. In that case, we're looking for any obvious signs of contamination or fouling or something else that might have gotten into our system. We're not seeing that yet. The hardware we flew up, we actually flew up 4 additional absorption pads on Crew 4, and I've got 16 more coming up on OFT-2. And so we have supplemental, these are very thin kind of absorptive pads that we can put on the inside of the helmet. One of them is towards the back of the crew member's head, and the other one is kind of a band that goes up over their head, kind of like in the shape of a headband, but attached to the inner layer of the helmet bubble. And so that would offer some mitigation and protection in the event that we had more than expected amount of water get in the suit. It would trap it and would get stuck kind of in this absorptive pad. So that is specifically what we're flying up on OFT-2. The suit itself that had this problem won't come home until SpaceX 25, and so we can't really look at the components or really get too far along in the investigation until we get our hands on the suit. So it'll be a little while before we can really inspect that. But the hardware we're sending up will offer mitigations in case we do have a contingency and we need to go out the door to support an EVA.
Okay. And I'll address the question on Rosie. You are correct. Rosie, the Rocketeer, is being put in to maintain center of gravity during ascent, docking, and undocking. There's also 15 sensors that are associated with Rosie where she'll be collecting information related to the seat pallet structure that is where the seats are attached to. So that's the nature of the instrumentation that we'll be collecting, and she'll be in the commander's seat.
All right, we have Bill Harwood from CBS on the phone.
Hey, thank you very much. A couple of quick ones from me. Let me follow Stephen Clark's question to Mark on the hatch. Is it closed for flight now, or will the team at the pad close it, open it, or close it? And is there any late payload going into the capsule after it gets to the pad? And for Dana, just for the record, Sandy Magnus, when she was talking about the suit thing last week at the ASAP meeting, she used the phrase "they're no go" for planned EVAs. I know you didn't have a EVA planned until the August time frame anyway, some Myrosa EVAs. But are they no-go for anything other than contingency EVAs at this point, just for the record? Thanks.
All right, the hatch is closed right now for roll, but it's not closed for flight. Tomorrow, the vehicle will roll out to the pad. The hatch will be reopened. There's one cargo bag that needs to be loaded. I don't recall what's in that cargo bag, and then the hatch will be closed for flight.
All right, and from an EVA standpoint, until we understand better what the causal factors might have been during the last EVA with our EMU, we are no-go for nominal EVA, so we won't do a planned EVA until we've had a chance to really address and rule out major system failure modes. The agency will go through it's like a flight readiness review process that we'll use before we do a nominal planned EVA. For contingency EVA, we'll have to look at risk versus risk. So depending upon what has failed and what the risk is to the spacecraft and to the mission overall, we'll look at where we are with the investigation, where we are with the additional mitigations that we're putting in place, and we'll specifically make a call based on the contingency and where we are at the given moment. But you are correct. We consider ourselves no-go for nominal EVA, and generally go for a contingency, though, of course, we would weigh what we've learned during the investigation before we'd go out the door.
Thank you both. We now have Mike Wall from Space.com on the phone.
Thank you all. Just a quick question, Mark. This one's probably for you. So could you talk about what some of the long-term ideas are about the like oxidizer valve issue? I mean, I know you've done mitigation in the short term, but are there plans longer term to sort of get at the root of the issue and kind of do something a little more major or do a redesign or anything like that? Thank you.
Okay, there's been a lot of questions on the oxidizer valve. Obviously, we've done quite a bit of testing and troubleshooting on this system since the failure. And that's been done in conjunction with our suppliers and with NASA and across several NASA sites. A lot of help to isolate down to root cause. We do have root cause. We know that these nitrates, which are the type of corrosion particles that form inside the valve that made it stick, are formed through the chemical reaction of aluminum, which is the body of the valve is made of, the NTO, which is the propellant that we use, and some moisture getting into the system. So the trick for this flight was to eliminate that moisture and make sure that it doesn't cause those nitrates to form. So we went to great extent to make sure that the valve is properly sealed off so that there's no potential for moisture intrusion into the valve, and to provide a really good dry air system around the valve. So the valves were encapsulated and then purged with dry nitrogen so that no humidity got into the system. We've cycled the valves a number of times and they've worked nominally. So the short-term solution has worked. It's worked just fine. The longer-term solution is still on the table. We want to complete some more testing, understand the catalysts of how fast these nitrates form, et cetera. But there's likely going to be, though there will be some changes, we just have to down select to what those changes are going to be. Like I said at the last time that we talked, that a redesign of the valve is certainly on the table, and the teams are working towards some of those options.
Okay, and we have another question from Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now again on the phone.
Hi, Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. Thanks for taking another question. This is probably for Mark or Steve Stich. The demonstrations after docking, can you talk about what the ISS crew will be doing inside the Starliner spacecraft? Obviously unpacking cargo, but some of the testing they'll be doing in the crew cabin of the crew module while it's docked. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take a few of those. Obviously, the plan is to fly in, do the rendezvous with the rendezvous navigation system, and then dock with the NASA docking system. Then the ISS crew would open the hatch, go in and retrieve the cargo, and then there's some objectives while we're docked to test there's a communication system between the space station and Starliner. We'll test that comm system. We'll go in and look at some of the displays and some general habitability of Starliner, kind of some of the major objectives while we're docked. So I know with the crew, last time I talked to Chell, he was very excited about Starliner arriving. And, they've done some training and practice for monitoring the approach, and they're excited to get in Starliner and see the spacecraft arrive. So.
Okay, we have Irene.
Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. Probably for Steve, maybe Dana. Earlier this week, Dmitry Rogozin had an interview on a Russian TV saying that the agreement is tabled for now by the Russian government. You mentioned before about the process. Have you all been notified of that? And is having a cosmonaut on Crew 5 off the table?
I'll take that one. We talked just yesterday with our space station program management counterparts at Roscosmos, and they indicate that they're still working towards the Crew 5 agreement. And so we've not yet heard what Rogozin put in his statements, though the agreements are making their way through the rest of the Russian government. But in terms of where we are right now, our counterpart colleagues are still working towards the agreement. I expect we'll hear the outcomes of the rest of their government review in the next couple weeks. We need to know by the end of June. We have to make the final decision. At some point you got to pick which crew is in which vehicle, and you got to finish up the rest of the training with the right crew match. And so that's kind of our deadline. So we'd really love to get this agreement in place. If we don't by the end of June, then we would push that out, another flight and continue working for the next opportunity.
And as Dana said, from my perspective, we're still doing the training and getting ready and preparing to fly a cosmonaut on Crew 5, and we'll be prepared to do that, and we're looking forward to doing that. So thanks.
Another question from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, hi. I've got some payload questions. Can you give any details on what kind of food you're sending up, and is it for the current crew up there, or is this future meals for the first Starliner crew? I didn't know if you're already putting things up for the test pilots of the Starliner whenever they do get there. And I know Boeing was going to be sending some Rosie the Riveter commemorative coins, mementos from historically black colleges and universities, U.S. flag that's going to stay up there until the crew gets it. Is that still packed away? Because that was all slated to fly last summer. Thanks.
Let's see, just a quick answer on the food. The food is being flown up for our current expedition crew, so for the crew that's on board right now. I do not have the complement of food, but we can certainly get that for you afterwards.
All right, and to follow up on some of the other cargo, there's, of course, the 800 pounds of cargo that are part of this test flight. There are 5 different types of tree seeds that are being flown this time through. There's a host of American flags with patches that will be flown. There's items from 14 historically black colleges and universities that Boeing's in partnership that will be flown this flight. There's silver Snoopy pins and Rosie and Riveter coins, and then a card that the Boeing founder signed and used to travel to the United States by air. So there's a number of unique items that are being flown for this mission.
The next question is from Michael Sheets, CNBC.
Hi, all. This question is for Steve Stich. I'm curious, with it looking increasingly likely that Boeing might pursue a valve redesign of Starliner, how does that affect the certification schedule and process? I mean, does Boeing need to go through a new certification and testing of those valves, and maybe give us an idea on the schedule and timeline of what that process would be if they do decide to pursue a full redesign? Thanks.
Yeah, obviously, if Boeing pursues a redesign of the valves, we would then go look at that certification from a NASA perspective, and we would work with Boeing hand in hand to figure out what kind of testing needs to occur, where it needs to occur with Boeing, and then how we integrated that back into the vehicle. In terms of schedule, we don't really have a schedule defined yet on how long it would take. I don't think it would be something that would be insurmountable in doing if we lay it in for a future flight. I don't think, knowing what I know about the valve and the materials and things that we could do, I don't really see it being a huge big deal from a certification perspective. We just need to go work through it, look at the materials, look at the performance of the valve, and make sure that the design is good to go fly.
Ken.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. I have a question for Gary Wentz again, please. Can you give us an update, talking about Vulcan Centaur, when it is going to fly, and when do you think Dream Chaser will fly these cargo flights to ISS for NASA? Thanks.
Okay, so the first Vulcan flight is scheduled by the end of the year, and it'll be carrying a astrobotic payload for the NASA's CLIPS program. So we're on track for an end-of-the-year flight that's our Vulcan Cert Flight 1, and Vulcan Cert Flight 2 is early next year. Right now it's slated in late February, and that would carry Dream Chaser. They're on our second Cert Flight.
No. Dream Chaser would be under Dana Weigel, right, from the space station project.
Yes, I think you're talking about when it would fly. So right now they're no earlier than February of next year. We'll be ready when they're ready. They've got a very aggressive schedule. They're making a lot of progress. Every time we go up there, it's impressive to see the progress they're making. And so we'll be ready as soon as they can get ready. We're happy to have them on board. Having the additional return capability for us is a really big deal right now. SpaceX is the only vehicle that can help us bring hardware home. And so we very much look forward to getting Dream Chaser up there and to getting that return capability.
Thank you.
Irene.
Thanks for the other question. This is kind of a philosophical question from Mark. In the traditionally how NASA handled space flight is always the best solution. They would pay for it under cost-plus award fee contracts. So you have this issue with a valve, and maybe not even specifically with the valve itself, but just using that as an example. In this era of commercial services, and when Boeing is paying for this, how do you decide if something is good enough? It may not be a gold standard or titanium standard valve design. But at what point can you get comfortable with having a solution that may not be a solution that you would have come up with in the shuttle program when the government was paying for everything, but is good enough for commercial flight services?
All right, so I've been part of both programs, both types of programs, and there's one thing that drives redesigns or changes, and that's safety. So we set a point, or we set a line in the sand that this is what we need to do, and that's what we focus on when we come up with our solution. I've noticed really no difference in how I'm working with NASA today with how I worked with NASA a year ago in the two different kinds of programs. We work very well together to converge upon a solution that's the final answer. And again, what drives that is safety.
And what's the safety issue of the valve? Is it a mission safety or astronaut safety, or what's the issue with it?
Well, we don't want it failing in flight. That's one safety concern. And the second concern is having a valve that could be unreliable either on the ground or in flight.
Yeah, Irene, the thing with these valves, right, is they're in isolation between the thrusters and the tanks, and so part of the use of those valves in flight, you have to close them and reopen them. And so, like Mark was talking about, it really is a safety. Obviously, for a crewed flight, you want to have all your thrusters available in each of the quads, right? Each of the parts of the spacecraft, and so that's why Boeing's taken a great approach to having it. The current system with the purge and the mitigations of no moisture so the valves will work. And NASA's been part of that. I would say the same thing Mark did to answer your question about this new commercial model. We really sit down and look at the problem we have and with Mark and his team and figure out what the best solution is. And we agreed for OFT-2 this was a great solution to have the purge system in place, to seal out moisture from the valve and then go fly it. I think we'll work with Mark and his team long term as to, if they propose different options for redesigning the valve, we'll sit down and look at those options and choose the one that's the safest. So I think we've got a short-term answer, and a lot of times I worked in Shuttle too. A lot of times we'd have a short-term solution for a few flights, and then we'd bring on down the road for other flights a different solution. So to me, the contracting mechanism is a little different, but the model works well both in this commercial model and then the government-led model.
Another question from Mike Wall from Space.com.
Thank you guys for taking the second question. This is just a really quick one. Dana, like you mentioned earlier that it's going to be a 4 to 5 day mission, and some of the previous literature had said 5 to 8 days. So I'm just curious, is the 4 to 5 is that pretty set in stone now? And if so, how did you kind of narrow down on that shorter mission length?
Yeah, I was really talking about dock days. So Steve can kind of go through with you launch opportunities, but so assuming we launch Thursday and then dock Friday, our first opportunity to undock is the 25th. And so I think probably the difference is I'm talking about the dock duration on ISS, and I'll let Steve kind of talk about the opportunities because they don't occur every day.
Yeah, we sized the flight, the dock duration, to get all the objectives completed. And as Dana said, the planned intended undock time is on May 25th at 6:30 p.m. Landing would be at the White Sands Space Harbor around 5:50 Central Time that evening. And then there's backup opportunities for the different sites. May 27th has another opportunity to land at the White Sands Space Harbor. This is a night landing about 1:11 Central Time. So what we'll be doing is getting into the flight, looking at the objectives as they get complete. Obviously, every time we start to embark upon an undocking and landing, we'll start looking at the weather, working with Dana and the station team, and find the right time to bring Starliner home. So.
All right, we have another one here in the room.
Jim Siegel with NASA Tech again. A question either for Steve or for Dana. Thinking about the commercial crew program long term, when the ISS is decommissioned, possibly by the end of this decade, what happens to commercial crew? What happens to the vehicles? Is there a commercial crew? It's over? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So right now the the model of commercial crew is different. We buy the services for the flights, right, from either Boeing or SpaceX. So at the end of the program, Boeing owns the Starliners. They own all the intellectual property. They own everything associated with it. The same thing for SpaceX and for Dragon. What we are working with Angela Hart and her group on these commercial LEO destinations. At some point, there are going to be commercial space stations. And so we're trying to figure out that transition right now from what we have today, which is a government-run space station with the commercial crew program. How do we transition in low Earth orbit to these commercial space stations with commercial space transportation? We're looking at different models of how do we certify those vehicles, and we leave it up to those companies that have proposed these ventures in low Earth orbit as to what transportation systems they propose. So hopefully that answers your question, and I'll see if Dana has anything to add.
Yeah, I would just add that, ideally we'd like to get those commercial LEO destinations or get a free-flying, commercial platform up and running before ISS is decommissioned. So in an ideal world, we wouldn't have a gap in transportation either for cargo vehicles or for crew vehicles. And as Steve said, the providers, because they own all of the property, can just transition to working with the commercial providers. So that's the big picture goal. We'd like to be one of many customers going to that platform and riding on the vehicles that we help support. So the race is on to try to get there so that we can minimize that gap and keep the transportation industry up and going and kind of transitioned over.
So just to clarify, after the ISS is decommissioned, and then there are, let's say there are private platforms up there to try to fly to, but NASA will not own one of those platforms. They may rent space or send investigations or something like that to those private platforms. Is that correct?
Right. It would look a little more like us buying the service of getting a ride up there with the provider. And then there are a lot of ideas about what we'd like to do on board, and it depends what the facilities are, what the capabilities are that are offered. We know we want to continue a lot of our crew rotations. We want to continue having that crewed experience. There's a lot of medical things we're still working on to get to our targets with Mars. There's a lot of technologies we're still testing, and so depending upon what capability they offer, we'd bring that with us, and we'd probably have agreements for using space or using facilities, et cetera, on board.
And also crew, I would add to Dana what Dana said, right? It's the space on board, but it's also sending NASA crew on these vehicles with these commercial LEO destinations as well on their transportation systems. If you ask me personally, I would love to see Starliner flying past 2030. I would love to see Dragon flying past 2030. NASA made a huge investment in both those vehicles, and they're great platforms to go to low Earth orbit. So we hope the companies that are out there are looking at these vehicles and trying to determine what their best business case is for these commercial LEO destinations.
Thank you.
All right, we have no more questions on the phone. If there's any more in the room here. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this briefing. Thanks to everyone who participated. Again, liftoff is scheduled for Thursday, May 19th at 6:54 p.m. Eastern Time. Our coverage on NASA TV will begin at 6 p.m., and you can take a look at your screen right now. That's where you can access NASA TV, nasa.gov/live. See you then.